Employment Dynamics webinar, Creating an LED Template for Economic Development. My name is Sarah Gutchow, and I'm with C2ER and the Labor Market Information Institute. Before we start our presentation, let me first go through a few logistical items. All webinar participants are in listen-only mode, but there will be time at the end of the webinar for a question and answer session. If you have any questions for our speaker, feel free to type them in the questions box, which you'll see in the GoToWebinar interface. You can submit questions at any point during the webinar, but we'll hold them until the end of the presentation. I will go through them and read them out loud to our panelists. Again, feel free to submit questions at any point during the presentation. Now please welcome our panelists from the U.S. Census Bureau, Kimberly Jones of the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics for the Center for Economic Studies. Ms. Jones will be introducing our guest speaker today, Mr. Jerry Lonergan. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Jones and we'll get started.
Thank you, Sarah. On behalf of the U.S. Census Bureau and the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, welcome to the Employment Dynamics Monthly Webinar Series. The U.S. Census Bureau and the Local Employment Dynamics Partnership in collaboration with C2ER welcomes Mr. Jerry Lonergan as he presents Defining High-Performing Metropolitan Statistical Areas. Mr. Lonergan shares how he used LED to compare, analyze, and better understand the recovery from the 2007 recession of the Kansas City Metropolitan Statistical Area and 14 peer MSAs. Jerry Lonergan is the Associate Director with the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City, a privately funded CEO-led organization seeking to positively impact the economic growth and quality of life for the Kansas City region. He currently serves as the Research and Data Resource Person at Civic Council in partnership with other civic and business groups. He conducts work to develop for Kansas City a Metropolitan Business Plan. He has developed internally a comparative data set of 40 indicators to measure and compare the region's performance with 14 peer metros. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon and good morning to those of you west of the Mountain Time Zone. I was scheduled to make this presentation in September, but my trip to Washington, D.C. was rather eventful. I managed to fall while I was running on the trail in Washington, D.C. I left half the flesh on my knees in Washington, D.C., and then I managed to get sick the day of the presentation. So I missed that opportunity, and I appreciate the Census Bureau willingness to let me do this webinar and provide the information that I would have provided had I had the chance to speak with a lot of you in Washington, D.C. You will quickly figure out that my presentation has a little sophistication or does anything particularly challenging with regard to the database or with on the map. I think, though, the workshop team feels that the value of this presentation is hopefully to suggest to you all the true breadth and potential for what I think is a very important, highly useful database that all of you are responsible for putting together and expanding to current levels. And so I'm grateful for all of your work. But again, I'll do a lot of background telling in this presentation more so than talking about how I use the database, because I think if nothing else, I hope it opens up kind of eyes and ears to the potential for this database to how it might help other kind of both civic and public sector institutions throughout the country, because I think it's a valuable and a very important database. I'll give you one example. We were in a meeting just 2 weeks ago with one of the owners of what is a billion-dollar Kansas City software company, and in the course of the conversation, he made a comment that he was sure that no one realizes just how many people commute from Jackson County, Missouri, which is the largest, most struggling county in the MSA, commute from Jackson County into Johnson County, which is the highly successful county on the Kansas side of the MSA. His assumption was there was a sizable number of people doing this, and that Johnson County was getting a lot of benefit from Jackson County commuters. But I had a computer with me, and within seconds I told him that the actual number was about 13%. So it surprised me that it was so low. But what it did, again, the availability of on the map, the availability of this data greatly increased the quality of the discussion around the table, and without being able to prove one way or the other what that percentage was, the discussion would have been a lot different. So again, I will say again, and I will emphasize at the end that what this is a really powerful and a useful tool. Kimberly gave you a little bit of background about the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City, privately funded. Our members are the 90 of the largest employers in the region, and in order to belong to the Civic Council, you have to commit that it's your CEO who will be the person coming to the meetings and participate in the various activities. So it's a small staff, but we have a very powerful and demanding board of directors. We look largely at long-term issues that are going to impact Kansas City, both its quality of life and its economic development. Some of the issues that we're involved with right now, and again, the work that I was able to do with On the Map generated a lot of the interest in doing the first one, which is a region-wide Metropolitan Business Plan to look at kind of the first time Kansas City has had a chance to sit down and figure out where do we want to be as a metropolitan region rather than a bunch of small community or a bunch of large and small communities intertwined. So that's when we're talking about the business plan, but we also we're involved in we took the leadership role in the life science initiative that we've done here in Kansas City. We were one of the initial funders and supporters and fundraisers for University of Kansas's effort to become a national cancer institute. One project I would mention is Kansas City, Missouri Mayor Slide James requested us to look at the city's HR function and decide, make some suggestions or some ideas how it might be a better performing, a more modern HR department. And so following the mayor's request, we put together a task force of the HR directors, I think, of 10 of the largest companies in Kansas City. And we also would eventually involve 3 public sector leaders from outside the state to come in and be a resource for us. And I think the most interesting thing that the private sector's members found out as the effort unfolded was I think they developed a new and a genuine respect for the different and unique challenges faced by public sector HR developers or HR directors than they face as private sector folks. I think initially the private sector folks thought that they would see the city's operations, or their operations, as clearly more efficient and focused and better functioning than the city ones. But I think over time, kind of attitudes on both sides kind of changed. So it's an example of how this interaction between the public and the private sector can have some really positive and good benefits for both groups. I think in the end we provided a quality report with a number of suggestions that the city is actually implementing. So I think, we'd say perceptives change. I think just the dialogue and the communication is a big thing in all of these processes. Again, just to kind of reacquaint folks with Kansas City, just for a point of reference, the Kansas City MSA, Kansas City Metropolitan Statistical, inconveniently straddles the state line of 2 states that are still trying to sort out the free state, slave state issues of 150 years ago, and so it creates a dynamic that's really pretty interesting. The map that you're looking at is a bit dated. The west-facing nose of that is Franklin County, and the Census Bureau took it out of the MSA the last time they did the revision. So there's 9 counties on the Missouri side and 5 counties on the Kansas side. The red on the screen is kind of the Kansas City, Missouri itself. And again, just to give you a basis for the information going forward, over the past few decades, Johnson County, which would be the middle county of the 5 Kansas counties, it's the one in the middle. It's been kind of the engine driving the economic growth of Kansas City MSA, and increasingly for the whole state of Kansas. Huge job and population increases that at one time were driven by a relatively homogeneous population base, and what in the past has been a well-funded and a respected school system. That county is beginning to take on some diversity, population diversity, and some challenges with the funding of the school system. So it's undergoing some kind of changes and revisions. But just for example, over the past 10 years, Johnson County saw job growth of about 7%, while Jackson County, the largest county on the Missouri side, actually had job loss of 7.4%. So a lot of people will say that Johnson County has been the primary driver for that metropolitan area. Again, the 2 state dynamics and the fact there's a state line almost dividing the metropolitan area, it's propelled kind of a competitive tension on both sides of the state. On both sides of the state, we're seeing kind of reckless tossing of economic incentives and tax abatements, all under the guise of economic development, in which, when you view that objectively on a region-wide basis, you're rewarding businesses for, in some cases, making just moves of a couple blocks just across the state line with no real net economic benefit. It's resulted in kind of an ongoing stagnation or slow growth in the region, and has kind of gotten people where they're a little concerned with what they're seeing. I will note, just for a little bit of self-promotion, civic pride, we also hosted 4 games of the World Series this year. After a 29-year drought, the Royals got into the World Series, and as you will hear typically characterized in Kansas City, the World Series ended with the Royals 90 feet away from sending the 7th game into extra innings. So it was just a little plug for the community. It was a pretty exciting time to be involved with that. And I should also mention, since the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, now the first place Kansas City Chiefs, is Clark Hunt, who is a member of our board of directors, and he's a real active and engaged member of the board of directors. And it's really nice to have people being involved and engaged with people that powerful in the community, and so they can get a lot of things done. We did in 2013, our board had a retreat, and as we have done in previous retreats, we prepared an analysis of Kansas City in comparison to 14 peer metropolitan areas. Again, this is not particularly sophisticated. It's merely a simple ranking of MSAs by a set of social economic variables. The one thing I'll say, that the results have been consistent over the years, and most importantly are now beginning to make sense to our members. We caution the board, as we tell everybody, that we hope they aren't seeing this as kind of a competition with winners and losers. We more provide it to them as an assessment that can hopefully guide thinking what different MSAs are experiencing as kind of successes, what opportunities might exist for Kansas City. As you can see, out of our 15 MSAs, Kansas City ranked 10th, which isn't, I think nobody would be satisfied with ranking 10th out of 15th. What was encouraging, though, that these conclusions that we shared with our board of kind of not being in a crisis mode, but being in a concern mode, were verified this spring with the release of a report prepared by our friends at the Mid-America Regional Council here in Kansas City and the Brookings Institution, that said that Kansas City said much the same thing. Kansas City is not in critical condition, but in some ways it faces kind of a crisis of complacency. And with no effort to make any changes, we could continue to fall behind. So I think, as I tell the board, we could easily find 15 communities that Kansas City would look great against, but that isn't the purpose of this analysis. I think, kind of an aside, I think one of the most interesting thing we've seen here recently is kind of the interesting and positive things that are happening in Pittsburgh. Post-recession, it's made a great deal of progress, and is increasingly an MSA that I think, as people that were at the C2ER summer conference could verify, that Pittsburgh is starting to do some things right. We're actually thinking they might be a benchmarking trip that we take. Just an example of some of the variables we use are like population and employment change, gross metropolitan product, poverty, per capita income, and migration trends. What you see kind of in the summary is that Kansas City is positioned pretty well from a demographic standpoint. From our challengers are mostly on the economic and the job side. I think, as the 29th or 30th largest MSA, depending on how you count it, we have the 12th largest share of our population 18 years of age or under. We have the 17th largest share of our population with at least a college degree. At the same time, our job levels are still below pre-recession levels, and our metropolitan gross product is declining relative to the U.S. Like a lot of MSAs, increasingly we're becoming more diverse with the growing Hispanic population. From over the last decade, 77% We had a 77% gain in Hispanics, which drove the region's 10% population gain. Kind of in summary, Kansas City has the building blocks for being a high growth MSA, for being a successful MSA, but we're falling behind in other areas, and if we don't do anything to impact kind of the opportunities for the large share of the population we have that's young, for the large share of the population that we have that is educated, our board recognizes that we need some kind of a region-wide effort in order to address these challenges, to make sure that these positives remain positive, and hopefully we start growing a lot faster than we have been growing. So we've got a lot of potential, but we've got a lot of concerns and worries out there. This is just another chart I wanted to show you on. This is what led into the analysis, looking at on the map. This is just the change in jobs from 2002 to 2012, and I know it's a dated chart, but I wanted to use the chart that we presented to our board of directors of the October 2013 retreat. It's this one, just kind of for explanation purposes. The tan bars are metropolitan areas that have had growth from 20 to 2012 and are now at pre-recession peak employment levels. So Austin grew by 24.8% in that decade, and now their population totals are higher than their pre-recession peak were. The blue bars are represent MSAs that grew for the most part grew during that 10-year period, but remain below their pre-recession employment peak. So like San Antonio grew by 16% from 2002 to 2012, but its total employment is still below in 2012, employment was still below its pre-recession levels. As was Kansas City. I just had Kansas City in the maroon so our board members could see it, but we're still below our pre-recession peak. And of course, unfortunately, St. Louis and Milwaukee are still in in a negative mode as far as what's happened over the last decade. So, this is kind of the genesis for. So, what are we going to do about it? Tom McDonald is he's a member of our board of directors, and he's also CEO of the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, which is one of the largest privately funded foundations in the United States, and its focus has historically been on entrepreneurship and education. Tom's a really good guy to have as a board member, but he always asks really tough and really important questions. And the first time I made this presentation, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, he said he thought it was interesting, but it kind of leaves the question. So how do you take this information and do something with it? So that's kind of anymore we've been challenged with. We just can't tell people what data are saying. We've got to give them some kind of a sense of what it means and what they can do about it. And this is where the on the map came in as to start to answer some of those questions. Again, what I did is very simple, and in no way is it sophisticated at all. I just went to the website, did a search by MSAs, the performance analysis on the selection area, and selected private sector jobs 2007, 2011, and then just like what the detailed report said. So again, the thing I'll emphasize is this is a simple database, but it's just a fascinating and real helpful database that I think the more it can be promoted to outside beyond the typical users, it can become a real useful tool and a real helpful tool. But this analysis actually provided an answer as far as at an MSA level to begin to provide some direction that our board members can begin to take. As you see from the screen, all the MSAs increased employment in healthcare and social assistance, and I think most of them increased it in the management of companies and enterprises, but that was only about 3% of the total jobs, so it really wasn't kind of the big impact piece we were looking for. But what we found, which was, as a researcher, you're always surprised and pleased and a little scared when you get an answer from the data that you're looking at, and this provided very real evidence that those metropolitan areas that had growth in NAICS Sector 54 were the ones they were the ones that would tell you they were the MSAs that are fully recovered and well on their way to overcoming the recession. Just a little bit of a run through from 2007 to 2011. This group of 15 MSAs lost 436,000 private sector jobs. Though within 5 years of the recession start, 6 of the 15 MSAs had renewed job growth that brought total jobs to or above the pre-recession level. And those are Austin and San Antonio. They had the biggest increase, and the ones that were above their pre-recession peak, but didn't grow quite as much were Raleigh and Nashville, Pittsburgh, and then Indianapolis was pretty much at its pre-recession peak. So there's evidence that the presence of certain industry sectors and the jobs they provide are more conducive to rapid and strong growth. All the MSAs that had surpassed their pre-recession private sector job levels lost a significant number of construction and manufacturing jobs, as did, all of the MSAs lost those. The healthcare industry, again, was the only sector in which all the MSAs had consistently strong growth, but that percentage fell even as fell in the weaker performing MSAs. Let me give you an example. The fully recovered group had an average increase of 23% in the healthcare industry, while the groups that were falling behind had just a 7% gain in the healthcare sector. So if you use Bureau of Labor Statistics, the annual mean wages, the second highest paying sector is the NAICS code, which is professional, scientific, and technical services. It includes engineers, bio and life science researchers, computer system programmers, and operators. All the jobs are kind of characterized by innovation. The biggest distinction between the more successful, the somewhat successful, and the faltering MSAs is the change in the number of jobs in NAICS Code 54. That sector is differentiating, at least among these 15 MSAs, that sector is differentiating those MSAs that are and will continue to succeed and those that will be left behind. And because the numbers that were intriguing for the board of directors was that the fully recovered MSAs created almost 6,000 jobs in the NAICS 54, and with an average wage of about $72,000, that was about $385 million contribution to those MSAs. Whereas the ones that were less successful or had lost jobs in the NAICS 54, they had an average loss of about $108 million in wages each year. Again, there's just a little bit more of a summary about the NAICS itself and the kind of jobs those are. What was key to our members, or what made this of value to us, was that the availability of this data elevated the debate. It's a clear direction for a focused economic development strategy. Again, I'm always worried when results come out that actually tell you something or tell you what you hope they would tell you. But we suspected that the Sector 54 was important. But again, we were quite surprised how clearly it showed that MSAs that have rebounded from the recession totally did it because of the strength of their Sector 54, the business, professional services, and technical services. Given that information, a clear focus, Kansas City is in the process of creating a region-wide Metropolitan Business Plan. It's called, under the name KC Rising. If you're curious, you want to track it or want to follow it, there's a website actually called KC Rising, RISING.com, and it'll be about, and you can kind of track how we're moving forward. But the key one of the key areas we're looking at are addressing human capital and structural foundations and jobs within Kansas City, and those would be jobs in our traded sectors, both export and international exports from the Kansas City, both domestic and international, both to domestic and international markets. And those are the businesses which are in the professional, scientific, and technical services, and also innovation and entrepreneurship. So there's kind of three working groups that we're working with: human capital, traded sectors, innovation and entrepreneurship. So, and those are largely the sectors that are designed to nurture and to work with this technical and business professional services sector. And the data provide kind of that rationale, the basis for why you should focus on it, and the reason for moving forward on that. So again, this database made it possible for us to make a decision based on information that was available from on the map, and I think information that will be useful in guiding us moving forward. Let me close by, again, encouraging anyone to think outside of who normally uses your database. If you hear of policy questions, if you hear of ideas that people want, I mean, I think there's a real rationale for introducing them to this database. I became connected to this database because some folks at the Mid-America Regional Council sat me down and said, hey, you ought to look at this. And so we've used it a number of times for our purposes. So again, I want to thank the Census Bureau and the state labor offices for this opportunity, and let you know that working with Mid-America Regional Council here in Kansas City, it's been a real valuable tool for us. And finally, this is on national television. My wife is Mrs. Lonergan, and this kid was tardy tomorrow, and he made the sign, and so she's an English second language teacher, so it was nice to see her get some national exposure, and I appreciate your attention. I hope you feel like this has been useful. If I accomplished anything today, I just hope that maybe I would invite you to kind of bring other people in and make other people aware of this database, because it's got uses beyond what any of us imagine. So with that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Jerry. We will now begin the question and answer portion of the webinar. We've received a few questions regarding the availability of the presentation after the webinar. The full webinar presentation will be made available on the C2ER and the LMI Institute websites within 24 hours after the webinar. As soon as they are available, we will be sending out a follow-up email to all attendees with links where they can be downloaded. So our first question for you is, can you give a little more information on defining the steps taken to improve the HR function in Kansas City, Missouri?
I'm sorry, would you feel like I missed the first part? Sure.
Can you give a little more information on defining the steps taken to improve the HR function in Kansas City, Missouri?
There was, I think the biggest thing, I think this makes sense to a lot of people. I mean, the most important thing was to get the HR department, which was a good HR department with a good HR director, to think more of themselves as a consultant assisting the city departments rather than as a gatekeeper and a rule watcher. I think there was a tendency to kind of focus more on checking blue squares rather than saying, how can I be a resource and how can I help you, Mr. or Ms. Director, Mr. or Ms. Employer, to help provide you with the best potential pool of candidates. I think there was some frustration expressed early on that a city department would open up a job opportunity, and they would get kind of a laundry list of folks that meet minimum qualifications. So I think that what helped with the dialogue was the chance to begin to understand, here's how you can help me make better decisions. So I think the big nut came down to just making sure that the Human Resources Department saw itself more as a consultant and a servant to the departments rather than as telling the departments what to do.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how did you select the peer regions for comparison?
It was, a lot of it was by field. I think a lot of times when people see that list, the odd one out is San Antonio, but what we felt was fascinating about San Antonio was how fast it was growing, and so we saw it as a chance to kind of have an MSA that was growing fast, that because of the immigration into it, it was a little bit of a different population base. So some of the list was picked by geography, because it was in close proximity to Kansas City, like Indianapolis, Minneapolis, some respects to Nashville, and Denver. I mean, those are kind of the usual suspects, the ones Kansas City always looks at. But we also tried to identify some that we would see as aspirational kind of metropolitan areas. So Raleigh, Durham, Portland, and Austin. I mean, those were kind of seen as three aspirational ones. So we kind of learned from them. So what we did was we picked the MSAs that made sense to us before we started collecting the data, so that we could feel like they were picked for an objective basis rather than just trying to make us look good or to make us look bad. So it's, again, nothing really sophisticated. It was more by feel than by anything. We added Louisville and Milwaukee just to have a little bit more of a Midwest perspective. So it's largely an art more than it is a science. I'm sure there's other communities that do a much more sophisticated way of picking their comparative MSAs. I will say this: we've been tasked by the co-chairs of the steering committee for the Metropolitan-wide region plan to develop a list, to look at this list, to develop a list of comparative peers with more of a rationale and justification for doing it. So again, it was more just kind of art and feel rather than science.
We have a request that you repeat what the database is and where it can be found.
I'm sorry, which database? You mean the business plan?
I'm not sure. That's the question. Can you repeat what the database is and where it can be found?
Well, I think let me answer this. If this is the wrong answer to the question, just have the person re-ask it. But the Metropolitan Regional Plan, the website for that is KC Rising, KCRISING.com, and it's just been put up. About the only thing we got now is kind of a cool logo with just some general information. So the process is just getting started. So don't go to the website expecting to see a whole lot of information. I've been asked to chair a research team that will kind of be at the beck and call of the steering committee and the working groups, and so we've been tasked with figuring out a way to populate the website with information and data relevant to what the group's trying to achieve. So again, we just got it. Right now, all it is kind of a cool logo. We hope it'll grow and be pretty useful over the next 6 to 12 months.
Great, thank you. And if that didn't answer the question for the person who asked it, you can go ahead and just repeat the question of which database you're looking for. Our next question is, do you have any sense if these high-growth sectors also apply to larger and smaller MSAs?
The answer to the question is no. But I really wanted to. That's the next thing I want to do is I want to just see if it was just a unique combination of MSAs that we had, or if we look at it, whether it would stand true across MSAs. I guess what makes me feel like that might be the case is just how consistently correct that was. That if you had a high growth, you had good growth in that one sector, your MSA would have done pretty well. Because as you know, we had a fairly rich blend of different metropolitan areas and different geographic areas. I suspect that's the case. I've not done that yet, but it's something I plan on doing.
Great. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Our next question is, do you believe Kansas City's growth in professional services sector is typical or atypical of that of the nation's during that same time period?
Kansas City is has historically been kind of right in the middle. I mean, we've kind of flowed with the nation. We do have a little bit higher share of our employment base in that sector 54. We have a lot of international engineering firms and a lot of architectural firms. So we have a little higher share of that. What we didn't see in Sector 54 in Kansas City was the kind of growth that we saw in some of the other ones. I think a lot of that is because I think this is just my own opinion. I think Kansas City has historically kind of lagged as an innovation economy, as an entrepreneurial economy, and so I think that's why we didn't grow as fast. So I think Kansas City probably pretty well parallels the growth at the national level, but I think our members here think that being average is fine, but we'd like to be a little bit above average. So I think Kansas City's growth is similar to national, but it needs to be higher if we want to kind of join those faster growing metropolitan areas.
Great, thank you. So I'll turn it over to Kim now for some closing remarks from the census.
I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you again to C2ER. Join us next month for exciting LED updates coming in 2015.
Great, thank you. And thank you to our panelists for such an interesting and informative presentation, and to all of our attendees for their thoughtful questions. So the full webinar and presentation will be made available on the C2ER and the LMI Institute websites after the webinar. And tomorrow we will be sending out a follow-up email to all attendees with links to where you will be able to download the presentation and webinar recording. So we hope to see you again at our next LED webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.